From the newsroom of Impact Alpha, I'm Brian Walsh, and this is your Impact Briefing for Friday, November 10th. Today marks the 125th anniversary of the only successful coup d'etat in U.S. history. It took place in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Impact Alpha's David Bank went to Wilmington, and we'll hear his conversation with Cedric Harrison, an entrepreneur building a business around recovering the history of that dark day. But first, here's what you need to know from this week in impact investing. Ocean-based startups are riding a wave. Less than a decade ago, the number of impact funds focused on the blue economy could be counted on one hand. But since 2018, the number of ocean-focused funds has quadrupled. Close to $4 billion will be invested in the sector this year, up from $700 million in 2021. That's according to Kate Danaher, who manages S2G Ventures' $100 million Ocean and Seafood Fund. Big private equity firms continue to find robust demand for their impact and climate funds. TPG secured $2.7 billion for its third TPG Rise Fund, up 25% from their earlier fund, but short of the firm's $3 billion cap. Meanwhile, KKR sealed its $2.8 billion Global Impact Fund 2 at more than twice the size of its predecessor. And Brookfield Asset Management bagged $6 billion for a renewable energy infrastructure debt fund. Likewise, retail investors are sticking with impact notes, even in the face of high interest rates. Deposits at big banks are falling, but Catherine Berman of C-Note says she is seeing increased demand for C-Note's flagship fund, which pays 3% interest and is invested with community-based lenders. Calvert Impact Capital has raised rates for its community investment note to 5% for 5-year maturities and 3.5% for 1-year notes. And this month's list of open impact funds features managers targeting creators of quality jobs and economic mobility. JFF Ventures, the venture arm of the nonprofit Jobs for the Future, invests in tech companies supporting worker upskilling and economic opportunities for low and middle income earners. Meanwhile, in Spain, Q Impact is targeting youth employment across Southern Europe. Find these stories and much more on ImpactAlpha.com. And now it's time for this week's featured conversation. The Wilmington coup of 1898 is not as well known as the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, but the events of that day changed the history of the city, the state, and perhaps the country, and not for the better. It was 125 years ago today, on November 10th, 1898, that an organized white supremacist militia attacked the city's black leaders and residents and forcefully removed their elected city officials before gunning down citizens in the streets. It was the end of the city's brief period of multiracial democracy and multiracial prosperity. Cedric Harrison, a Wilmington native, has been recovering the lost history of the episode in children's books, videos, and a compelling bus tour of the sites of the violent takeover. Impact Alpha's David Bank went to Wilmington, took the bus tour, and sat down with Cedric for a conversation about the insurrection and the history of race and economic power in North Carolina.
We're coming up on the 125th anniversary in November of the coup in Wilmington of 1898. It's considered the only, I think, successful coup d'etat. A whole government was toppled by a white supremacist movement. What struck me, what you were telling us this morning, how orchestrated it was, how premeditated it was. Can you just give us the brief overview?
Yeah. So the coup d'etat of 1898 was the only successful government overthrow that's been documented to this point on U.S. soil. Because Wilmington was a prominent town for Black success, not just entrepreneurially, economically, or socially, like you saw in some of your other massacre towns like a Tulsa or Rosewood. But Wilmington was one of the places to have the first political power here that was leaning more so towards blacks. And so that was taken away in 1898 because of some prominent white people here in Wilmington that were connected to the Civil War and some other bigger white supremacy institutions and organizations. And I'll leave it at that for now. And they were put together something called the White Declaration of Independence. And they felt like the only way to be able to successfully carry out the White Declaration of Independence was to get rid of the power that black people had gained here in Wilmington. And so we were targeted, and some people still question it, but there's been facts and evidence that point towards this being orchestrated all the way from a state level to even a national level. They felt like what was happening here in Wilmington, if too many people found out about it sooner than later, that it was going to take an effect that could not be overturned. And so that is how whites came and gathered and rallied up in the city and literally went and burned the town's businesses and neighborhoods, just like, the stories of your Rosewoods and your Tulsa, Oklahomas. But here, because we had that political power in the South that was very much so rare and unique, that was taken away here during that time. They literally made the mayor of the town sign over his position as he had a gun held to him and was escorted out of the town. And the people that held that gun wrote their names and position, and nothing ever in American history has ever been done to repair this tragedy.
Well, take a step back, because what was also striking was the multiracial prosperity and coalition of particularly poor whites and poor white farmers, the Populist Party. This was a white-black majority. This was not a black majority. This was a multiracial success story. Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe that was what was so threatening.
Yeah, so for people now, there's two main there's two main leaders in the party roles now when it comes to government. There's Democrats and there's Republicans. But in Wilmington, there was a political party called the Fusionist Party, and it literally was a spin-off of the fusion that had happened between progressive whites and free blacks. And they had took over the political seats in Wilmington 100% in 1894, literally a few years before 1898. And during that time, it was already so much racial tension because the Civil War was over with, and a lot of the Confederate soldiers that had to live with losing and seeing the winner celebrate every day. It was like a domino effect as they continued to see more and more celebration of excellence come from the black community or from progressive whites or for whites that at first didn't have certain things were now gaining access and power. And so they were targeted. This political party was targeted, and this honestly started the Jim Crow movement throughout the state of North Carolina, which then trickled down throughout other states in the South.
The first attack of the plot, as it were, was against the black-owned newspaper,
the Daily Record.
The Daily Record, because that was sort of a focal point for organizing, like I said, this multiracial coalition, and they burned that building down.
Yeah, they did. The Daily Record was one of the first black-owned daily printing newspapers in the state of North Carolina. It was owned by a man by the name of Alexander Manley, who was interracial and very successful. He had more black and white subscribers than the white competitive newspaper here in town. Also duly noted that newspapers still exist. But with that being said, there was an article that had came out in 1897 by one of the daughters of the Confederacy. It was produced in a newspaper down in Georgia, but ended up making its way throughout the South, as the message that she put was that they needed to save white women, or her term was Southern womanhood. And to save Southern womanhood, her thought process was that they needed to lynch a black man a day to do so. And Alexander Manley was not a fan of that opinion. And with his newspaper platform, he responded back to that by saying that if women or Southern women or white women were scared of losing themselves to black men, that he felt like they need to look within their own households and look within themselves or their fathers or their brothers or lovers or what have you, and not put that blame on black men, as a lot of black men were minding their business, not trying to get into trouble, especially after the Civil War had just been abolished. And there's a lot more details in the article that you can go and actually still read to this day. But that article was then reprinted again in 1898, right around election time. and it was used as propaganda and as a political agenda to not give power back to the Fusionist Party here in Wilmington. And so it ended up rallying up people from all over the state. It was reprinted by your News and Observer and by other big publications throughout the state. And during that time, it rallied up ex-Confederate soldiers and their family members. And these folks came and rallied up in Wilmington and set up shop in front of different voting polls. And these folks were called the Red Shirts. And these individuals stood armed at voting polls and would scare people away that was coming to vote for individuals that was a part of the Fusionist Party that was up for re-election. And they were actually very successful with that technique, as the members that were up for re-election that year did not get re-voted in 1898.
And so this was to split the white vote off from the black vote and to, in a sense, divide this multiracial majority that had some political power here.
Yeah, but they weren't just scaring away black voters; they were scaring away white voters as well. If you seemed like an ally, you were known. You know, they were doing their research, so they were knowing who the white people were that weren't racist or weren't. Or I should say that they knew who the white people were that was supporting the black people, the white people that were a part of the Fusionist Party, their family members that was connected, and things of that nature. And so, not only were black voters targeted away, but also whites.
And so then the mob descended on City Hall, made the black elected officials resign at the point of a gun, as you said, substituted white officials, and then violence ensued after that. And I think it's not quite known how many people are killed, but what are the estimates?
Yeah, so it's not quite known how many people was killed, but the massacre happened before the official coup went down. During the massacre, they said at least 21 to 300 blacks were either dead or gone. Right now, they have documented 21. They only know the names of about 14 of them. That's still being documented. You can find and have that. That's researched at the Legacy Museum. That's an exhibit at the Legacy Museum. You can find the information there. But then the massacre happened first, and the reason why the coup came after is because even after the massacre happened, after they killed a few of the black folks during that time, they still realized that a lot of the power was still in the hands of folks that could fix a lot of this stuff. And so once the smoke was cleared, the next day they went to Thalian Hall, City Hall, and made the remaining members of the Fusionist Party, which was the mayor, alderman, and a few other elected positions, sign over their positions, and they escorted these people out, armed escorted these people out of Wilmington. And then the people that led this initiative wrote their names in position and stayed in position, and their family members are still prominent, and some of the things that they put in place are still actively still operating.
Well, let's take it forward a bit to now. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is, people have a dream of kind of multiracial prosperity that would, lift all boats, so to speak. But it turns out that, when that in itself is threatening, and there's often a backlash. We're sort of in that period now where, there's two steps forward, and then you start seeing a backlash. There was just a white supremacist in Jacksonville that gunned down some black people just because they're black. So how do you see the sort of ebb and flow of this?
Yeah, so like I tell people all the time, 1898 didn't happen and go away. It evolved over time. It perfected itself. It happens now, still to the extreme, like you just said. For an example, in Jacksonville, Florida, there's still some folks that get so emotionally charged that they'll just go and grab their guns and take out violence on people that just don't look like them for whatever reasons that don't even have to do with the people that they're taking this violence out on. To where now they can harm you and not even get anywhere near a gun, touch you. There's people all the time that get drugged through the media. That propaganda that was used during the time to build up to 1898, that specific technique around using the media and the news and stuff like that to make you feel like this person should be discredited or demonized or deleted, or what have you, comes all the way back to the practices that they used to organize around 1898. The things that we learned on the tour today about David Walker and his appeal and how you could get killed with owning this book, and it reminds me of the efforts that's going on right now around the critical race theory and the 1619 project, except Nobody's not trying to gun down Nicole Hannah Jones, but that's what happened to David Walker,
and so, banning books in Florida.
Yeah, banning books. Yeah, exactly. And so these things are still here, and it just goes back to that saying of, if you don't know your history, then you're bound to repeat itself. And so as I was a person concerned about all of these things, and living with the consequences of these decisions that have been made and continuously not being fought against, I felt like one of the first problems that I was having was people just continuously saying, "Oh, I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know," and that frustration was the energy that charged me to create an entity that teaches you. And now just trying to do my best on marketing and getting that out there so that more and more people can learn and know, and that they have access to have this teaching.
Well, there's your tour there. We met this morning at the 1898 Memorial in the Brooklyn Arts District of Wilmington, and I noticed as we went around, lots of plaques and historical markers trying to remind people. You showed me the site of an old Confederate statue that had now been torn down after George Floyd's murder. So people kind of know now, but still there's voter suppression. There's other forms of racism, obviously. What beyond just knowing is needed?
Yeah, so it's crazy because this happened in 1898, but the placards that you're seeing now just literally are not. They're no more than 5 years old. The placard the only placard that has coup in the entire nation. Well, I would just put it there in 2018. I was at the ceremony. I have a video on my Instagram page of me unveiling it. And so it got to the point where they hid it for so long. Right? They've been working on hiding it for so long. They hid it for 100 years. A group didn't have a public conversation in Wilmington about what happened in 1898, literally until 1998. 1898 Memorial Park was put in 2008. And so it's like, oh, somebody found out. Let's do a little bit about it to make them feel like we're changing the way. But a park doesn't change the effects that happen to the community. It does build awareness. It does market it. It does make people be more aware. But it doesn't change the effects. So then here it comes again with George Floyd, and now people want to do more. Oh, let's put a placard here, and it makes people feel good to go to the placard, take a sign, and then we had the ceremony, but then those same people go and still make decisions that keep us at bay or keep us from having a leg up or gain or getting any gain in this community. Those are the things that I'm hoping people are paying more attention to, because as we've been given the tour, yeah, we do have plaques in certain areas, but a lot of the vacant lots that I showed you didn't see any plaques in those areas, and people have been asking why and what for, who owned those properties and things of that nature, because a lot of the areas where blood was shedded that are attached to the 1898 story are still vacant lots.
And you talked about, the political power, obviously, but there was also economic power. And one of the things actually that struck me is all the Black-owned businesses you pointed out, and some of the information about how Black economic power actually, kind of revived in a way, and folks built new businesses, and incredible resilience in the face of all the repression. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk a little bit about how Wilmington feels now for Black entrepreneurs, Black business owners.
Yeah, so during 1898, this was definitely a very striving area. Wilmington had about 125 entrepreneurs, from the man that will paint your horse and carriage to, the first Black daily printing newspaper in the state. But then after 1898, a big foundation of those entrepreneurs did leave, were ran out of town and had to restart businesses, or some of them maybe never even had the courage to restart businesses, just went and got a good job and just stayed safe from wherever they moved to or went to. But because of the Jim Crow era and segregation, it did create a moment again for Black entrepreneurs to step up and create opportunity for themselves, as you weren't able to go to other entities and get insurance or get a doctor, or have a lawyer, or somebody to make your watch or tailor you. Those individuals were able to revitalize themselves after 1898, simply just because no whites were still coming up to help. There was the white hospital would see Blacks, so there still had to be Black doctors here. And the same goes for many other different businesses and entities. But now, as a Black entrepreneur in Wilmington, when it's only 18%, not only as an entrepreneur, you can't create a business that is just culturally exclusive to your culture or your community, because your community isn't even at a high enough population to sustain it. And even at 18%, not all 18% are going to come and patronize you all of the time, especially when a lot of the 18% in Wilmington, honestly, are at a low income living wage level. The big neighborhoods and middle class and high class neighborhoods in Wilmington are not majority Black. None of them are. Majority of the neighborhoods that are majority Black are housing authority project, Section 8 low income area neighborhoods. And so, as an entrepreneur here in Wilmington, you see a lot of businesses open and close. You know, when we started the tour, I showed you a venue, a business that's not open anymore, but you can still see the sign outside because they just closed. Like literally, we were just giving tours last year, telling people to go and patronize this business, and now here it is a year later, and this business is not still here. But you know, I look right across the street, you know, where we're at now, and these businesses were here longer than that business was over there, and you just sometimes ask yourself, you know, did that person not have it all to be the successful entrepreneur for that entity? You know, was it one or two things that they did wrong to not still be successful, or, you know, is there something else happening?
Cedric is building his tour business and trying to open a museum to illuminate the history. For a deeper dive into the lead-up and the aftermath of the coup, pick up journalist David Zucchino's Pulitzer Prize-winning history, Wilmington's Lie, The Murderous Coup of 1898, and the Rise of White Supremacy. That's going to do it for this week's Impact Briefing. Thanks to Cedric Harrison, David Bank, and our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. Sign up for ImpactAlpha Open, our free weekly newsletter, directly at ImpactAlpha.com, or become a subscriber to get full access to our award-winning daily coverage in impact investing and sustainable finance. Just go to ImpactAlpha.com/subscribe. I'm Brian Walsh. Be sure to check back for next week's briefing. Until then, take good care.